So team, welcome to the automation testing with frameworks. It's for the orientation session today. So we definitely wanted to call out as automation testing with framework development. We just don't want to call it as an automation testing because there's a good amount of emphasis that we're going to do towards the end that once we have the basics on the framework development. Because if you look at the way you can differentiate in today's world of competition with respect to automation testing is only when you say that I'm an expert in framework development or I can own the automation end to end, by developing the frameworks, then you will be able to differentiate yourself among the crowd that is there. So that's one of the main reason. It's just not the automation or it's just not the automation development or the best practices of doing the automation development using one of the primary language like Java or a Python, but it definitely emphasizes on the framework development, be it a keyword-driven framework or page object model framework or a data-driven framework for that matter. That's the emphasis on this particular training. So, and this is mainly about, again, when we talk about automation testing, there are many tools in the market. So obviously, people talk about which tool or which technology is important. As we all know, the kind of market share that we have with respect to Selenium is major, and most of the tools that recently developed, for example, if you take Catalan Studio, it's one of the tools totally built on the Selenium library. Or if you take keyword driven frameworks that are available on the market, so majorly they have built on top of the Selenium library. Or even the behavior driven development, test driven development tools, they are using the Selenium engine as a library. And Karthik and the team at Workasa also have developed a tool called AnyAUT, and most of you are also familiar with this, especially who are the members of ITLN. That's also using the Selenium libraries as engine, and on top of it, they made a nice user-friendly management tool, which is used for both manual testing and as well as an automation testing. So if you look at that perspective, obviously Selenium is in the front race, and it's been there for a while. It's almost I can think of like 7 to 8 years. It's still there and it's ruling the market. It's still in the front race. So that's one of the reasons to pick up Selenium as the core for this. And again, when it comes to Selenium, there are different technologies or languages that you can use. You can go for Java, you can go for Python, you can go for C#. But again, we looked at the market share, we looked at how many people are actually using it. So for that reason, again, Java is definitely in the front race, even though there is a good amount of emphasis on Python and C#. But the Java is definitely in the front race. But to answer this question, because a lot of times people ask me and people ask in various forums, which is a language to pick up? Does anybody has a similar question? If I'm having Selenium, let's say as a tool, then what is a language that I should pick up or I should learn, or the company should pick up for that matter, the testing team has to pick up? The answer is very simple, team. Like, it mostly depends on what is your development team actually. For example, if the development team is using Java, overall the project management team also wants to go with the automation with the Java for the reasons that we already have an in-house expertise, in-house development of the team in Java. So it's easy for many ways. One is from a knowledge sharing perspective. One is from integration point of view. Because again, it's not just about CI. It's just not about the frameworks. You might have heard about a very important concept called CICD, which is again a very important in automation. It's not just about again an automation development or framework development. It is more of how you are going to run these automation in a continuous integrated way. From your development, let's say your development team completes a build, and then they will run their unit tests. Even from there, how do you deploy this onto testing environments, and how do you run the sanity tests, or after that the regression tests, and then how do you publish the results automatically on a daily basis? If your organization is working on daily build model, then your automation is also going to run on a daily model. So we'll introduce to all these in a practical way. Obviously, we have tools like Jenkins, Maven, which are going to help us to do this. But all these things are going to be easier when you pick up the language or when you pick up a platform for the development of automation, which is same as your development team also using it, be it a Java or a Python or a C Sharp. So that is how mostly the testing team will or the test management team will decide what is the language that is going to be used. And if you look at from that perspective also, Java is majorly used, and that's one of the reasons that most of the Selenium people who do automation development also uses Java. I'm not discounting the factor for Python or a C Sharp. C Sharp is very less, to be frank. Actually, we can discount it, but Python is also kind of equally important, but not even equal share like Java. So it's there. It's important. That's where we're going to introduce to both Java and Python, but primarily to start with is obviously the Java. So is that a fundamental question of what technology to pick up is clear, tool and the technology? Okay, just one quick question before we get into more details. I wanted to launch a quick poll to understand from your background, like who you are, whether you are a beginner of the IT or you already have some knowledge of an automation, or you are into already an IT Learn membership. So just want to quickly know some of these before we get into more details. So please answer this poll. I know some of you may be attending multiple sessions with us, but still, uh, yeah, just go ahead and answer it, please. We'll close this in 10 seconds, team, so I can see only 86% voted. Still, there is a scope for 14%. All right, I'm closing this. So here are the results, what you can see. There are about close to 20% beginners to IT. You're welcome. Obviously, it's a great place to explore and try it for the jobs. We have 27%, roughly 30%, already trained in QA and looking for the first job. Again, all the best. And I can say the only way you can get the first job, saying that, I have knowledge and experience on both manual and automation. And do not, I mean, it's okay to try out on a manual, but the kind of competition is high and the number of jobs are very less if you just say that I'm only an expert in manual testing. And that's why even for the people who join with us, for the basic membership, we're going to include the manual testing for them and introduce to manual testing for them before we actually get onto automation. So both manual and automation is important, and the best combination of the job is obviously both, because if you directly get onto automation testing and trying to automate certain things without having the basic knowledge of what is functional case, non-functional case, or what is a test case, then also it's not a good combination. Or if you do only automation all the time, 100% is also not a great job, because you're not really exploring to the extent of the system, the product that you're working on, which will give you some opportunities later. Like I just talked in the previous session, if somebody is not there, we had a manual session a couple of minutes back. So do watch out that orientation. How you can actually grow in the organization or in the industry, starting with QA. If you have a sufficient knowledge on the entire system, you may become a scrum master later, you may become a project manager or a product owner, or if you want to grow vertically in the same QA, how you can become a test lead and a test analyst and a principal QA, and then you get into management side or still on the IC path. So if you just do only automation testing 100% all the time, doing like a developer, then also you may not be really growing much on the product knowledge side. So the best combination is obviously manual plus automation. So we have 27% of the people who trained in QA looking for the first job again. So uh, that's increase the knowledge on the automation side along with the manual, and then you'll be able to find it. 42% working in QA, planning to move automation. So again, there are some people who are experienced with the industry, how it works, and I'm sure you have sufficient knowledge on how project management happens, how the requirements comes to you in the form of stories, and how do you go about preparing your test plan or strategy. May not be in QA, you may be in some other roles as well. But again, learning automation makes you end-to-end. Learning automation makes you the best professional and probably will give you more opportunities than what you have today. So it's a good mix of audience. And I don't see, very interestingly, I don't see anybody working in automation testing. Even I would like to see that kind of, we usually get that as well. That's why I'm saying. For the reason that they would have just learned an automation testing, or they know some basics of Selenium, or even to a matter of advanced Selenium, but they are really struggling with a practical experience or an exposure, or a project experience or an exposure. I would like to see some of those folks also, like, kind of joining us, and I have it in different batches. That's why I'm saying. And that's good. I mean, if we have that, we will again get a different level of experience because they're already facing some of the problems. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to give you an exposure to those for you, but it's a good mix of people that who are into it, and unfortunately we don't have any of them. That's still okay. I'll introduce some of those complex problems what we generally face, and we'll try to solve them during the training. So this is about on the knowing about the audience. Just put one more poll to understand from the IT Learn members' point of view. So just quickly answer this as well for me, please. Whether you are already a, oh, sorry, one second. Okay, this is basically, and yeah, I think this is even important for us. Accidentally, I launched another poll, which is still important. So do you think automation framework is critical for software testing projects? Because if you have a sufficient knowledge on just automation development, can't it be enough to go and get a job? Did anybody try it that way? And have you started getting those questions in the interview? And if I do a lot of hiring, even the only first question, if I don't have much time to judge somebody because he's already cleared through written test and one round of technical round, and let's say I'm doing the second round or maybe a kind of hiring manager round, just to quickly decide, the first question that I'm going to ask them is like, put some questions on framework development straight away. I don't want to go and talk about like, how do you read the data from an Excel and display, or how do you go about what API files that you'll use it for certain development of a scenario. I'll directly jump on it and say like, if this is a scenario, what framework you're going to use, and can you help me with all the different components of the framework and how do you interconnect them? So 65% of you believe, okay, let me close this. Okay, so 70%, let me share this. 70% of the people says yes, frameworks are critical, and 17% says probably no, and then 13% says maybe. So we can obviously, the maybe people maybe, and they've not really experienced the question, so we can consider still part of the yes, because I can assure you it's important. There are 17%, close to 20% of the people says no, maybe because that they would have experienced by the time they're joining in, there is already a framework in the team, and all their job is to write the test cases matching to the framework, add more new cases, and because again, let me tell you, in the real time in the project organization, not everybody gets an opportunity to develop a framework. If the company is already using automation, if the company is already working with automation, framework development would have happened, and your job is going to be mostly to understand the existing framework, which method to call at what time for which scenario. Let's say you are handling some pop-up exception scenario, and there is already a framework method. All you have to do is just call that method, and your job is done. So if you have experienced such kind of things, well and good, worked so far. But when you wanted to switch the company, when you wanted to change your, or when you wanted to grow to the next level, that is not sufficient. So I can definitely say framework development is critical for two reasons. One, if you want to grow and maybe you wanted to go and become an independent automation engineer in another company where you set up the framework and where you set up the things for the team that is going to happen, or for the reasons that don't expect the smooth flow everywhere that you go. It's totally might be very different game altogether there that you have to start altogether. So in such scenarios, I would definitely say automation framework is critical. And anyway, when you're learning, when you're spending time and money to learn it, we'll learn it in depth in such a way that you'll be master in doing that framework development. And it's not just framework development, as I talked about, the CICD, complete continuous integration and development. Okay, the question that I wanted to see is, cool, looks like, sorry, I missed that question here. Anyway, so just like, maybe we have people with the membership already with, how much you know about IT Learn? That was a question. Like, you're already a member of IT Learn. That was a question, but that's still okay. So I don't have it right now. It's my bad. We can still move ahead with the details that is required. Now, from an automation perspective, so these are some of the, these are the things that we're going to learn it with respect to Selenium and the framework development and the complete CI/CD. So we'll start with a detailed introduction to the Selenium in tomorrow's session, and of kind of give you a background of how Selenium started. What, like, there are still people talk about Selenium 2.0, 3.0 differences, or they say 2.0, 3.0. Some people still talk about RC. We don't need that anymore going forward. But just to give you an idea about all these things and when it is started and how it started, all that. Very detailed introduction that will just walk you through, which will set the context for learning more in detail. Then to start, fundamentally, any automation tool, for that matter, majorly gives you kind of recording and playback options, like be it a UFT or a lean FT or a Visual Studio Test Suite, or even like Selenium, but it is slightly separated. So we have a separate component called Integrated Development Environment, or an IDE, and so that's where we're going to spend hardly 1 or 2 sessions, not more than that, because practically or in real time we are not going to use it much. But then you might have a question like, why are we going to spend time there? It's mainly to understand this locator identification options, which is going to be the knowledge that is going to help us when we get into WebDriver. While working with WebDriver, we're going to see all these options, like how can we identify a locator by an ID, by a name, class name, CSS, XPath, link text, partial link text, etc. But if you just do this practice of identifying all that in the form of IDE, by the time when we get into WebDriver, you'll be master with this concept of identification. So for the people who are absolutely beginners to the automation, what is this I'm talking about is like, so you have your application. We generally call it as application under test. And this is your application. And you have your automation tool, whatever the tool that you're going to decide. Let's say this is Selenium. So the way it works is that in your application, you will have different locators. We call them as objects or locators. And typically, if you take applications, you'll have a text box, a list box or a combo box, and you will have some check buttons, radio buttons, maybe critical things like there is a grid available here, a table kind of thing, and sometimes you will see forms. Maybe there is a form here, sorry, frame. Let's say you have a frame which is a dynamic frame, inline frame, and then you have some buttons like submit and cancel, etc. So typically, if you see your application under test, it will have many different locators. The kind of knowledge that you need to gain as an automation engineer is like, how do we deal with these different locators? Like, how can I work with this text box? What are the different methods or operations that the Selenium supports on a text box? Like, for example, how can I enter a value to a text box? How can I retrieve the value from a text box? How can I say that this text box is a multi-line text box or a single line text box? Or how can I ensure that this text box is enabled for entry value, or it's currently disabled because I don't have a proper authorization rights to enter the value there, so it's currently disabled. So how do I know all these things programmatically? How do I know all these things in an automation? Because you all you need to think of is a scenario where if you're in the CICD model, what is going to happen is that your automation will kickstart automatically in the designated time. Let's say you scheduled it like every day 11 p.m. in the night, my automation should start. That's how we are going to configure. So your Selenium will start running this automation 11 p.m. Without your intervention. You may be at home actually sleeping, but your automation is going to start, and it is going to run all the test cases that you have put it in the suite. So that particular time, let's say this text box is disabled and you're not able to enter the value. So is it a expected behavior or a not expected behavior? All that your automation should handle it and take care of that. So all the different operations on a text box, drop down, checkbox, a radio button, a grid, right? And a form that you have or a frame that you have, then kind of button to push it, and then what is the acknowledgement you're going to get, and it is probably is going to store that information in a DB, and then how whether it is storing the right information in the right set of tables or not, or it may be kind of is going to launch another application and then it's going to do the sub. So how do you switch your focus from one application to another application and then continue your automation on the different application? So all that is going to be a critical scenarios that I'm just talking about. But coming back to the fundamental question of this locator identification, these are the different locators. So how does your automation is going to identify this text box? What is the mechanism it uses? And similarly, how does my automation identify this drop down? And then what methods it supports? How does automation identify this grid or a table, and what kind of methods it supports to go through different rows and columns or different cells we call in the table, and identify a value and see whether it is matching or not matching to an expected value. So all that, learning from different locators, gaining the knowledge on different locators and experiencing through practically is the kind of expected knowledge bank. And those are some of the critical scenarios that they're going to ask you in the interview to clear out your job. So we're going to understand the different ways of these locators and how they're going to be identified before we get on to WebDriver itself, so that things will be more smooth when we get into programming. This is more like a very user-friendly IDE, and actually there used to be a Selenium IDE that has been upgraded to something like a Catalan IDE. So we're going to use the latest one of this just to play around to see how we can record and play back the script. So what I was talking about is any automation tool will give you these basic features of recording and playback to start with. So you can simply put your tool on a recording mode and just go and perform actions, and it is going to generate the script. And next time when you just wanted to rerun it, you'll just click on the play button and it is going to generate playback the same set of steps on this. Of course, you need to take care of unique values, primary key values, etc. Because if the same value that is going to be used, then it's a violation while inserting it to the DB, and it will throw an exception, or it might tell you that this record already exists and all that. So you need to change those basic values and run it. And again, in between, obviously a language come into picture. Any automation tools that you take, depending on the kind of tools that we have in the market. For example, when it comes to Selenium can support you multiple languages, as we just talked about it. So let me just go ahead with the main website, seleniumhq.org. So from here, you can see what are all the different uh, of course, this is from where we are going to download. This is the latest version as of now. But if you just go down, these are the different primary languages it will support, like, and you can see one way to confirm is that the kind of more check-ins or more new versions available for the Java compared to the other versions of it. That also shows the kind of more emphasis on which language, and where people are expecting more and more updates, etc. But these are all the different languages that you can use: at Java, C Sharp, Ruby, Python. You can even use JavaScript. So when it comes to the tools, automation tools, they will use some language, obviously, like Java, Python. So it will generate this script in that particular language. And our job is not just this recording and playback. Maybe this is just to kickstart with an automation to understand how my tool recognizes these locators and how the script generates. And it's not a bad way. It's a good way to start, actually, because anytime that you wanted to get familiar with the tool and its way of working, we will start with these recording and trying to understand how this script is generated. And these tools like IDE or Catalan IDE or Selenium IDE will give you an option to, just by click of a button, you can export this. We used to call it as a Selenium script in Selenium, and in Catalan, it's like, again, a Catalan script that you can export it into multiple languages. Like, you can, just by click of a button, you can export into Java, you can export it into Python, you can export it into C Sharp, etc., or plain HTML mode. So you will have all those formats, and you can take off from there which language that you want to become an expert in that. So when you play back, ideally this language code is going to play back on your locators and try to perform the operations which you are asking to do. So we're going to understand all those fundamentals, basics in the first 2 to 3 sessions, so that we are good for converting this into Java, C Sharp, so that we're good for the more practical with respect to WebDriver. So any questions so far before we just introduce to what are all we're going to learn? I don't want to just make it like a one way. There was a question, there was a comments on the frameworks when I talked about, we just add new things to the existing ones. Like, yes, that was an assumption that even I took it. Some of you said who not important, frameworks are not important, maybe from that background, but better to prepare for the development. As I told you, the scenarios where you want to grow in your career. Any questions before we look at other things? All right, so okay, there will be practical as well in the sessions, obviously, yes, and we will pick up a project and we'll do on that, all of these. And towards the end of it, again, there will be a project sessions going on where we'll identify people who are interested, group them, and after the complete learning is completed, we'll give you a project and you will do the project work, and we will be there to review and help you where things are needs to be corrected, etc. But that's only after the complete learning. Yes. Okay. Can we convert script from Java language to Python? You will find outside libraries, but not from the Selenium. So it's only from that recorded script we can convert. Okay. So topics covers frameworks too. Let me get into that. Okay, are we going to talk about something like Cypress? Cypress is picking up. It's a new framework that is coming up. Let me see what best I can do there without promising much. It's more like, yeah, we'll talk about that. So Cypress is again, that's what I'm telling you. A lot of people. One is most of the frameworks that you see in the market are developed on Selenium. Cypress is the only organization which is trying to come up with a new framework. But that's like off topic from Selenium, but I can introduce to an extent as much as possible. Okay, let's look at these topics and uh, so that will answer some of your questions as well. So we're going to start from the fundamentals of installing the Eclipse, installing or downloading the Java, configuring the Java, and then configuring your Eclipse with the WebDriver, and then starting with the fundamentals of Java programs and then WebDriver programs. By the way, parallelly, Karthik is starting another training today itself. Please watch out. It's on the core Java. It's very important for the people that you wanted to take up Selenium with Java. It's not that, yeah, we are not going to cover as part of this, but when you learn a program itself as a separate, that is going to be more and more important. Do learn as much as you can from the Java programming, and it's actually not from a development perspective, it's from the automation perspective. So which is required? Yes, it's ninth. Yes, I can just show you. Yeah, it's here, 6:30 a.m. Pacific. Okay, so please do attend that as well because it's important. Even to work in Selenium, the kind of knowledge on the Java is important. So once we have the basic fundamentals of Java program and one WebDriver program, whether we are able to do the basic things with the WebDriver on the corresponding browser, whether it's a Chrome or Firefox or an IE, then we'll get into more details of we'll try to look at all these possible ways of identification. Like I just spoke some time back, how can we identify a locator with an ID and name? So when the developer develops the application, each locator is given some unique attributes like ID, name, class name, text in case of a link. If it is a link, there will be a text. Sometimes the text is too big that you don't need to take the entire text, so you can just go ahead with the partial text. There is something called CSS, and then there is something called XPath, which are more important. So we're going to understand all these different ways of identification, 8 different ways of identification, each with an example, and then we will make a conclusion what to use when I should go for ID, when I should go for an XPath, when I should go for a CSS, etc. And then we'll go through different locators, like how do we work with text box and what are the different common operations that are there. How do we work with a list or a drop down? What operations are there? For example, you might have test cases like, or you might have a test scenarios like, just to, I have a website and my automation current requirement is to go and identify all the links on the web page and ensure if there is any link is broken. So basically to identify the broken links in it. For that, I need to know how to identify a link first of all, how to identify all the links, how to go to each link through a loop, writing a for loop in Java. Then how can I identify which is broken out of all that? So I need to write some good amount of code. It's not that most of the time whatever is generated from the IDE is going to help us. So a lot of times we are going to write the program. So that's why the Java is important. Similarly, I may need to identify different operations on a list box, radio button, push button, check buttons, etc. So we're going to look at all of that. And then we'll look at the different commands. So most of the time, it's all predefined methods of Selenium 3.0 library. The latest, whatever the version that we saw here, 3.14159 is the one that we're going to use. So basically, using the Selenium libraries, we're going to do a lot of these, navigating to different browsers. I told you the last step in one of these application is going to launch you another application. So how do you switch from one browser to the other browser? How do you go to the different URL and start working there? how can we navigate through different commands, and how do we capture the data? Okay, before you take any operation, perform any operation on a page, you wanted to confirm whether you are in the right page or not. So you want to capture the title, validate whether I'm in the right page or not. Sometimes you may have to capture the source code and then do some operations. All that we are going to learn it through fundamentals of it. And then it's a very common problem that happens in any automation is the synchronization issues. Sometimes, your application responds faster, sometimes your application responds slow. According to that, your automation should be tuned in such a way that, like, you cannot use a thread.sleep or a wait commands all the time, because it's going to simply kill out the performance of the automation. So you need to have a dynamic wait, basically based on my application behavior, how my application is going to respond. I need to ensure only that long I'm going to wait. I'm not going to waste any seconds beyond that, or I'm not going to proceed any seconds before that. So that's when you have a right balance between your automation and the application. So we're going to talk about the different synchronization methods. And then we're going to identify all the links on a page, all the links on all the buttons on a page. So basically, Selenium WebDriver gives you find element method and find elements method. So if you are very sure, its ID, or its name, or its XPath, and you want to identify one element, then you'll go for find element. Now you want to find out or work with more than one of those elements, then you'll go for find elements. And in all these cases, you need to understand the object-oriented programming concepts, like how to define a class, how to define a method, how to define an object of that class, and how to use how to use the object to call the method or a variable. So we're going to introduce to all those object-oriented concepts as well. The most important, I would say, no automation will be complete without really, reading your test cases or reading your test data from an Excel. So we're going to look at how can we read and write the data from or to an Excel using, for this again, there is an organization called Apache. It provides jar files, POI jar files. So we're going to use those jar files and read the data from an Excel, be it a test data, or when we develop a framework, it could be your test cases that you're going to read it from there and write it back to that. And that introduces to something like a data-driven framework. So we'll understand data-driven framework and how to do that. And especially when you're working with web-based applications, there will be lots of alerts, pop-ups, coming up, advertisement pop-ups, and some sort of security exceptions pop-ups that are going to come. It'll tell you, like, you're navigating to an unsecured site. Do you want to continue? Yes. Or there is an advertisement pop-up that is coming up. So how you're going to handle all those web-based alerts and pop-ups? How do you work with dynamic windows? Windows will dynamically change based on the selections that you make. For example, if you are an administrator, some extra set of options. If you're a normal user, some set of options. Like, some windows also, the browser windows also pops up based on the options you select. Or even if nothing is changing, if you have more than one window, how you're going to switch from one window to the other window. It's not straightforward. You cannot just go and directly work on the second window. You have to use something like switch to commands, from switching from one window to the other window, or from one frame to the other frame. Then in case of, you need to get the window handles first and see which window handle has what title, and then to go to that particular title. So we need to do all that in the Selenium code. And obviously frames are important. Nowadays, most of the web applications that you see, you will have frames inbuilt into it, or dynamic frames available. Things like, maybe advertisement from another website is coming over here. So such kind of things, how do you deal with the frames? Even if you have static frames, dynamic frames, how do you handle those frames? What are the different methods that the Selenium gives you? So these are all kind of, till here we'll categorize it like a uh, basic WebDriver. But when you get into all this, because from this itself, you'll get a lot of knowledge, and somebody can say, oh yeah, I've learned good enough things that I can go and try out for a job. You can do that. But if you can wait till advanced gets completed, that's like anything. So you'll have more knowledge on it. To deal with all these things like frames, and if there are web tables in your application or HTML tables in the application, how are you going to deal with it? How do you generate multiple actions? Sometimes you may have to do, there is an actions predefined class. So how do you generate more than one action? Suppose I may have to do Control Alt and some, Shift F5 or a Control Alt. I mean, I don't want to do Control Alt Del, but if that's an operation, or Shift F5 or something like Shift F2. So you want to do different operations. How can I generate those actions and trigger them at one shot? So those kind of things. And a very common requirement that we need is like, taking a screenshot whenever things go wrong, whenever your automation test case fails, or even for that matter, when it gets passed, you want to take a screenshot. So how do we take those screenshots using Selenium libraries? All these things are very important. And while working through these, yeah, that I will introduce in the listeners, using some of the listeners and even test engine listeners. There are some predefined frameworks that we are going to use apart from what we are going to develop, but we are also going to use some of the frameworks like JUnit is one of the unit testing framework, though popularly developers use it. Even a lot of automation test engineers also use this framework because just writing your tests as a normal classes and methods and then calling them, if you write in the form of a unit testing framework, you will get a better report. How many tests are there in that class? How many passed? How many failed? How many could not run? So that kind of information is going to be available in a nice report. So we'll talk about the JUnit, which is a unit testing framework, very popular in the world of Java. Then we are also going to talk about a TestNG framework, which is very, very popular with respect to the Selenium community. So we'll talk about what is TestNG framework, how do you configure your Eclipse with the TestNG framework, then what are the different annotations in that, like, at the rate test, head before test suite or an after suite, before class, after class. So there are different annotations, how to use these annotations, how do you pass parameters through this particular TestNG framework, and then how do you generate the reports, and how do you use the listeners in the test ng to listen and do the job at the required time. So very, very important framework, and I've seen a lot of people, in my case also, we use this framework in real time. Yeah, a data provider annotation, obviously, yes, data provider annotation, for that's where I'm saying DDT. Then we'll talk about something called Selenium Grid. If you wanted to do a parallel testing, you write once and you wanted to perform on different operating systems, different browsers at one shot, then for example, you have to do in multiple combinations of testing. So going sequentially will take a lot of time. For example, if each test case is going to run for 2 minutes and I have like 100 test cases, so then I would need like 200 minutes to get the results. Rather, I wanted to split and do a parallel testing or a parallel testing, multitasking. Then I can use something called Selenium Grid, and I can configure it in such a way that first node I'm going to run with Windows and IE. Second node I'm going to run with Macintosh and like Chrome or a Firefox or a Safari. Third one I'm going to run with something like, again, a Windows and Chrome. So you can do configure like that, and then split your 200 test cases it into like 4 sets or 4 nodes, each one with 50. Then you will have less time execution for all your test cases. So we're going to look at what is the Selenium Grid and how to configure nodes, and how do we do this parallel testing. Then we're going to do definitely testing on database related. So how can I connect to MySQL or Oracle or a SQL Server database? How can I write a code from my automation? Like I talked about one of the scenario when you few minutes back, when I do something from my application, it is going to insert into database, whether it is inserted in the right table or not. How can I do that validation? So we'll do with the database testing and using the JDBC or like the latest way of connecting it. Then a very advanced framework that everybody's expected to be master and kind of used, it is like the page object model or a page factory. You can go and build your automation in such a the frameworks in such a way that if your web application is having, let's say, 10 pages, we are going to build a class file, Java class file, for each web page, and in that particular class we'll take all the operations that I'm going to perform on the page. For example, let's say if my application is having some login page, customer page, order page, reports page, I'm going to create a Java class separately for each one of these. Java class 1, like that, Java class n, and all the operations that I'm going to perform on the login, like, uh, logging in with valid credentials, logging in with invalid credentials, logging in with OTP, without OTP, in a secure, all those methods I will write it in this class. So it's easy to find out if something goes wrong with respect to any of these test case. I know in which class I can find it out. So rather than writing all of them into one Java class file, it is an easy and best way to navigate and segregate it into different class files. Not just that, we do have a lot of other advantages. So we'll go create a class for each web page that you have in the application, and then you will create a page factory object, and then you'll call all these methods in your test class. So you'll create another one called test class, and in the test class you'll call the test cases based on these methods. For example, first I need to call login method, and then I need to go call create customer method, and then I need to call report method. So you'll create your test cases accordingly. So we'll talk about this page for a page object model or a page factory. It's one of the important design factory in Java. Apart from that, as I told you, so you will be getting a sufficient knowledge on the Java with respect to an automation tool point of view, not like a complete Java developer point of view, which we don't need all the concepts, but we definitely need the concepts like what are the different data types that we have, what are the different operators we have, what are the different conditional statements, control statements, loop statements, all that you need to have a sufficient knowledge to do an automation. Then, as I told you, we're going to build a data-driven framework. We're going to build another very important framework called keyword-driven framework, which again, few of the organizations uses this as well, where for each of the operation or activity that you're going to perform on your application, they'll define a simple English language keyword. And the new, like, that's when some of you told framework is not very critical. Maybe you would have experienced there is already a framework and all your job is to call the method or the keyword. If it is a keyword driven framework, you just need to know what is a keyword that you need to call, and you're going to prepare your Excel sheet with this object, and this is a keyword, and this is the operation that I'm expecting based on the keyword, and here is my test data. Your job is done. But the person who developed this framework would have written the code, what is that keyword means and what's the operation it has to do, with a proper exception handling, with proper, all the scenarios in that. For example, uh, click of a link, you'll define one function. Selecting a value from a drop down, you'll define a keyword. Entering a value to a text box, you'll define a keyword. So for all those keywords, the person who develops the framework will write the code how to do that, and the remaining people simply use those keywords and their job is done. Sometimes it's not just one framework, it's a hybrid framework that people use. It could be just a combination of page object model with a keyword framework, or it could be like a data driven framework with a page object model. So we need to understand like what is a hybrid framework and how do we go about that. And with respect to the logging point of view, so whenever you do an automation from a troubleshooting point of view, when something goes wrong in the future, when your test case fails, we need to know what went wrong and where is this gone wrong. So from a logging perspective, log4j is very famous in Java. So we're going to configure log4j into our automation, and we'll see how do we perform the logging as well. Of course, there will be a CICD point of view. We're going to talk about the Apache Maven integration. So in the world of Java and Selenium, what is going to happen is it's all open source. If you are familiar with any commercial tools like QTP or UFT, or if you have worked with any tools like Catalan, or any of those nice UI tools, you will feel it little difficulty to start with on Selenium, for the reasons that everything is an open source. and it's an open source community where people have come together and started build this. And the people who are going to use this also don't expect everything to be ready-madely available for you. You have to go hunch out different jar files, and it's not that difficult. It's very easy with the kind of community that we have and the help that we have. And anyway, training is to do that. We'll go get all the different jar files, and you have to configure them into your development environment, be it with an Eclipse or a JBehave. You will just connect all of them, and then you start working with respect to the development. So then naturally there is a problem arises is like, how do you manage all these jar files? What if you're trying to build a code and there is one of the dependency jar file is missing, or it is not having the right version? How do we take care of those things in real time? So a lot of times the real projects uses something called Apache Maven, which is a build management tool, and there is a pom.xml file in that, and all you need to do is you need to put all your dependencies in the pom.xml file with respect to the corresponding versions. So if anything is missing, the Maven will automatically download it from a Maven repository and add it to your project. So you don't need to really do that manually. So this is more like after we create multiple projects and learn and Selenium and kind of master in it. Now going to the next level of CICD and taking care of build management and dependency management through that. Then we'll understand the proper CICD tool, which is Jenkins, where you can create a job and you can schedule it so that it will run automatically when the time clicks, be it like 11 o'clock in the night or 12 o'clock in the morning, and then you want it to run when your development team completes the build generation. And also we'll understand there are some of the important things are apart from the normal functional testing, automation, and the regular thing. People do expect you to have sufficient knowledge on test-driven development, acceptance test-driven development, behavior-driven development. Like you might have heard about tools like Cucumber, Robot Framework, etc. So we'll talk about those. How can we do, you know, behavior-driven development using Selenium and Cucumber? How can we integrate these two? And there's a tool called Robot Framework, which is again built on top of Selenium library. So what is that from framework is all about? So just introducing to all of these is very important. And then we will have frequently asked questions discussion. Of course, at the end of every topic, in every session, we'll talk about frequently asked questions. But again, towards the end, we will have, me and Karthik will join and try to explain you what are some of the frequently asked questions and how do you prepare your resume so that you're good for the interview's point of view. So these are all the different topics. I hope things are clear. Like somebody was asking, what is this covered or is that covered? These are the main topics. But apart from that, whatever is coming in the industry latest, like Cypress, somebody talked about it. We'll talk about that. And any other things that you need to know before you hunt out for the jobs. All right. Any questions at this point of the time before we kind of pause it for today? Okay, what is the question, Suvarna? Let me just go back and see if you have already put the question. Okay, so yeah, after the Feb sessions, to be frank, even I was traveling to US, Singapore, and then I'm back. So that's why we have and also from an ITLN point of view, like Karthik and the team restructured these courses in a way like what is going to it's a time we have been doing this and doing this and doing this, but it's better to take a step back and kind of structure them like that's where you see these different levels came in: level 0, level 1, level 2, level 3. Want to categorize them in the right structure. That's where I think they have taken a little bit of time, but yeah, I mean, you can reach out to learn@itln.com, or I would expect the team to call you back and answer your questions. So yeah, and then what is your question, Rajeshwari? Like, I'm not sure about that. Again, I would expect team to call you back, or you can just write an email.
Hi, Shankar, Karthik.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I think what we will do is for both manual testing and automation, in fact, even the Java sessions, we're going to do about 2 to 3 sessions as demos for everyone. Let them join and get used to how it's the rhythm is schedule and so on. And then they can look into the different membership options. So till then, team, we will communicate about what's coming there.
All right.
When do you need to pay for the session? So for all new memberships, by I would say Thursday or Friday, you would get a detailed email, not today, tomorrow, after tomorrow's session. But you can in the meanwhile go to the pricing page. We will shoot an email about it, team. Can automation is done one automation? I did not understand your questions for now there. Do you cover API testing? I think concept of certain services and interface-based testing will be done in manual, if I'm not wrong, right, Shankar? But it will not be a focused web services or API testing training.
Yes, but we do have videos for them. So in case
Video
want to go
memberships,
through
yes.
like
So like SOAP UI and RESTful and so on, I think we have videos on them. You can always access. But what we do are we look at the more popular courses that are in demand, and then we also do the occasional courses. For example, mobile app testing or Catalan or web services, SOAP UI, performance testing, load runner, um, all of these as well. So keep in touch. Oh, did I lose my audio?
yeah, there was a
I
jet with it.
yeah. I think maybe for a second. So we'll stay in touch with you about all the new live sessions, but you have a good library of videos as well. I work on mainframe. Can automation is doable? Is automation doable? Okay, let me answer it this way. For automation is doable, but Selenium is not your solution because Selenium works only for web-based applications. So if you look at HP QTP and UFT, they had used to have add-ons to specifically recognize applications that were built on Java or .NET or VB and so on. Even for SAP and so on, they're plugins. I'm not absolutely not sure anything on mainframe automation. Mainframe testing, yes, like black box and manual, but mainframe automation testing, I'm not sure myself. And we're not covering any of the mainframe testing in this. Uh, Another question. So I don't have much programming experience. Should I first take Java training and then Selenium training? Let me put it this way, team. All right. You can attend both, but the way Shankar is going to cover the automation testing training is with the assumption that you have a zero coding knowledge. So if we are writing any code, we will talk about it intensely and train you on Java as well, or C# or Python, whatever we use in the automation trainings. The standalone training that I'm doing in Java, like Shankar mentioned a few minutes ago, is going to focus just on Java, about programming. We'll play around a lot more, not with just the intention of Selenium or automation as independent. Let us talk about building simple Java-based applications. That is what we're doing there. All right. So you do not need any prior knowledge in Java to join any of these trainings or programming, and you don't need to join Java first and then Selenium. Both can be done independently or together. Why people are learning Protractor as well for JavaScript apps? Okay, so I think not JavaScript apps only, even for Angular and Node.js applications, they're more dynamic. I think some of the web element recognitions are changing with these new apps. That's the only thing. So Suvarna, there's a question. I paid for Feb session, which never took place. I did not get my refund. So number one, we don't have a refund policy, but Feb session did not start. You're welcome to join now. If you have still a challenge that no, I do not want to join now or something, please talk to our team. We will help you out with it. Okay. Let's see, Kalpana. I have about 15 months of gap now working as manual QA for a very now after working as manual QA for a very long time. After completing this training, will I be able to bridge that gap? So Kalpana, 15 months is not a long gap. Yes, you can bridge it from a knowledge acquisition and projects. From a timeline, you will have to talk about it and think about it. But what is it that we will do from, let's assume today is day 1 and we go on till about day 30, next 40, 45 days. all this knowledge that you'll acquire in the training and the project will go into your resume for sure in a very structured manner. Yes, it'll help you to build your resume. If you're a level 3 or level 4 member on the training side, then you have access to projects as well. All right. So let me quickly share the pricing page to all, and you can watch the video on it that talks about the memberships team. Shankar, I know it's a hard stop for you. Sorry, the questions flowing
Yeah.
in. I thought quickly a handle.
Okay.
You can, Shankar, I don't see much anymore. We'll keep connecting every day, and I'll do the Java trainings in the morning, my morning.
Sure.
All right. All right, everyone. Thank you then. We'll send more instructions to the email, but here's the same link. Keep joining every day. We'll continue with this training. Thank you so much, all. Bye now. Thank you, Shankar.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thanks,
team.
everyone.
Bye, all.